hey everyone, and welcome to KPC Underground. This is the podcast we do right underneath our stage here at Kirkland Performance Center, and I'm so excited today to be with pioneering jazz, R&B, hip-hop artist, musician, songwriter, producer, José James. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And
it was long. There was many things.
I could have kept going,
Exactly.
to be totally honest with you. But José James, has a show tonight at KPC, and they're getting set up there for it. So if you hear them in the background, it's all good up there. So thanks for sitting down with us and chatting a little bit on the KPC Underground podcast.
This is awesome. This is my first time here. I already like it. It's a vibe. You can tell right away before the sound check how the night's gonna go.
Yeah.
When
That's
you
always
walk
good.
on stage, you're like, okay, I know how tonight's gonna be.
Right. That's great. That's a good feeling. You grew up in Minnesota. That's actually where I grew up too.
Seriously?
I grew up in Fairmont, Minnesota. Small town you probably haven't heard of. It's a small town among a million other small towns, as you know. What was that like, creatively? It's not maybe Minneapolis isn't the first place you think of when you think of necessarily those big music cities, but it does have an interesting culture. And what was that like for you growing up in the Midwest, and how did that shape like your creativity?
It was unbelievably vibrant, honestly. I mean, I think Minneapolis is really one of the great music towns of America. Obviously Prince is from there.
Yep.
And there's a long history of jazz musicians, of people coming through to go to Chicago. It's kind of like this flow through space, which is interesting. And it's a huge rock town. So there's just a ton of musicians. And when I was in high school, the whole Rhymesayers kind of new hip hop thing was just kind of bubbling up. And I would always go over to Electric Fetus, Prince's favorite record store, and just get new stuff all the time, And for me, there was no separation between, the visual arts at the Walker Arts Center, the performance, the Guthrie. I saw Branford Marsalis at the Guthrie. A really high level, high quality everything. Bill T. Jones. Really high level work. And when I was in high school, in particular, Bobby McFerrin was the artistic director of the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra. So I remember going to see him at Orchestra Hall, conducting, the orchestra, doing all Mozart with guest Chick Corea.
Just
playing, a concerto. And then they did about an hour after the show, just duo.
Wow.
And that came out on an album. But I mean, it was just like, so I was like 18.
Right.
So that kind of stuff, that level of musicianship and was happening all around me.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's amazing. You mentioned Bobby McFerrin. Like that, it's actually amazing how often that he comes up as an influence for people. I mean, just a tremendously influential and obviously extremely talented and unique, person. But I imagine the jazz world specifically is kind of filled with. I mean, it's a world of all of those influences, and then reinterpretations and I don't know. It's that communication back and forth between you're receiving something and experiencing music, and then you're giving your own 2 cents and influencing back. And speaking of that, your latest record, On and On, and what the show is tonight. What was it that inspired you to kind of take this project on and specifically with like Erykah Badu, to what was it about her catalog that inspired you, and what was your approach to that?
Great questions. It's probably the riskiest thing I've done in my whole career. It's the kind of thing that if you get wrong,
right,
you'll just get buried forever. It's like he's the guy that messed up Erykah Badu's catalog. And some of the challenge that I like now is conceptual with jazz. It's not harmonic or theoretical. It's like, well, can a jazz singer do Erykah Badu stuff? Right. Is it even interesting? Is it cool? Is there a way to find new standards? That's kind of my goal. And I'm a real student of history. I love Nat King Cole. I love Louis Armstrong, Billie Holiday, Frank Sinatra, Ella, Sarah. The whole lineage. and they were singing the popular songs of their time. Not necessarily the hits, but the popular music.
Sure.
You know?
Right.
And Erykah Badu has unquestionably been a huge force in music for 25 years.
Right.
Baduism came out 25 years ago. So for me, I said, I think it's important to sort of look beyond the standards, and I think I'm the man for the job, And thankfully I was right, I haven't met her yet, but she heard the music and co-signed it and everything, and
oh, cool.
That was a huge relief because people have really lived with her music for a long time, including myself.
Yeah.
And she's sort of spawned so many incredible artists herself, Georgia Ann Muldrow and SZA and Janelle Monáe and kind of all different styles, So I don't think there's anybody like her in music, actually.
Right. That's so interesting. I mean, and I love that idea of, the new standards thing, because I think, we are living in a world where, and she is that caliber of an artist, absolutely 100%, where people in, 100 years from now will still be reinterpreting and listening and going, wow, and this was an amazing artist, the way we do with, these romantic, very old, standards. And so I love that approach, and that's so cool. Speaking of, that kind of world, you are, notoriously genre bending artist, and
I was like notoriously
and so very comfortable in a jazz world, but also in an R&B world and hip hop, and where do you draw the line, or how do you know that it's going to work? Do you get an idea and then try stuff? Like, for example, on this record, did you go in with like, okay, I'm going to write out all the parts and here's what it is, and drummer, you play this, and piano player, you play this? Or was it like, hey, I got this idea, I want to take it, and I want to do this jazz take on this old, on this old tune, and then how do you know if it's working? Is it just a feeling you get, or do you try things that sometimes don't work, or what is that creative process like for you?
Great question.
Well, it's long-winded question. No, sorry.
This is really great. I'm very much in the school of Miles Davis in terms of band leading and my approach to making albums, for the most part.
Yeah.
Particularly if there's a jazz element to it.
Yeah.
And that is find the best musicians.
Right.
Put them in the right room, mic everything up, roll tape, and don't plan anything. And that in and of itself is a plan, and it only works with incredible
with the
musicians.
Right people.
And it's funny because I've done it the other way, where I've had that level of musicianship and then kind of gave them direction, and that didn't work.
Right.
So you kind of have to let those musicians go free.
Those kinds of musicians.
Yeah, because they're
at that
composing.
Level. Yeah.
Like, you can't tell Herbie Hancock,
right,
this, play this arrangement.
Here's the sheet music.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So with the Badu thing, it'll probably sound unbelievable, but we didn't rehearse. I sent them, these are the songs I want to do.
Just the album track. Here's the
just her album. Just
here's the tracks.
And there were a couple things that I sketched out, like the beginning of On and On. I said I want to do this Coltrane thing. Here are these changes, but it's like 4 chords. It's very minimal,
right?
And we just went and we just played it. And I, a lot of it is the concept. I said, I want it to record to tape. I want it to be like,
oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah, everything was live to tape in Woodstock in this amazing studio called Dreamland. It's a huge church that they redid in the 80s, and we're all in the same room.
Yep.
So everything's bleeding into everything. Yeah. So you can't
vocals too, or
the vocals. No, I'm not that brave. I'm not that brave. The drums and the vocals were isolated.
The band,
but the band was there, and there's no doing it over.
Right.
It's
just the take.
Yeah, and it's really just about. That's how you bring the jazz to it, because that it's a moment. That you're capturing together. And the hard part was finding the songs that were, in my opinion, sort of flexible enough to take that dissection,
that approach.
And Erykah Badu, I mean, her repertoire is super deep, super wide, super varied. Really, I mean, apart from like maybe Frank Zappa, I can't think of anybody who's got such a wide range of styles.
Right.
you kind of think of Badu as this one thing, but when you really dig in, you're like, wow. Like you could put 2 songs together, like from her first album and her last, and you're like, is this the same artist?
Yeah.
Some of them are nearly instrumental, like long, chanty, weird, like drugged out, like zony, spiritual incense. Like you're like, wow, this is trippy.
Yeah.
It's really very psychedelic. Some of her stuff.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and that makes sense that that kind of creativity lends itself to the jazz genre. When I was listening to the record, I was actually like, oh wow, this is pretty actually straightforward, or not straightforward jazz, but I mean in terms of some of your other stuff, which is like, wow, he's really, with the exception of maybe The Healer, which is a little bit more R&B. Yeah. But I think I was like, wow, this is like this beautiful kind of traditional like jazz take on this stuff, and obviously like just recorded really well, and I just really appreciate that and loved your interpretation of that and your take of that, and obviously you had great players in the room. Speaking of that, you a few years ago you started self-producing your own stuff, and then in 2018 you co-founded a record label.
Yes.
And so, sort of 2 questions about that. First, the producing. We have some educational programs here that we do through Kirkland Performance Center, and the podcast kind of goes out to people who are like, just getting into music and want to do recording and stuff. We just built a studio actually a couple blocks from here.
Oh, nice.
And so we're doing some classes over there, some technical classes and things. So when you say you produced it, and that means different things to different people, and so you'll get a different answer. But what was that process like for you to self-produce as opposed to having someone producing your record for you? And what was that like?
Well, I actually, it's funny enough, I produced by accident. I produced my first album, The Dreamer, by myself. Mostly because I had produced the demo and they're like, we like it, just do that. Right. And I was like, okay, I can do that.
Right.
And, I have to say, I know Rick Rubin's been getting a lot of kind of flack for his latest kind of, truth-telling about
just very
his process.
zen. Yeah.
But I think, ultimately the most important thing is taste. And whether, and however that taste is sort of disseminated, that's a different story.
Sure.
Whether it's very technical or not.
Right.
For me, obviously it's analog, so there are a lot of really important decisions to make. Number one, the room. The room sound you can't change. Right. So the room, the equipment, I mentioned I've been working in Dreamland, which is up in Woodstock. It's a church in the middle of nowhere. Everyone stays up there. Yep. There's no other focus except the music, which is just beautiful.
That's special.
It relaxes everybody. You have all day. Yep. You have all night. You go to the kitchen, you make a coffee, you go outside, you look at the sky. You know what I mean? It's just a different thing. So that's a production choice. Yeah, right.
Saying, sure.
Like we're not going to do it in the city. We're going to get out, but not too far out. Yeah. And like they have a beautiful 2-inch tape machine. Right. They have an incredible, beautiful desk, mixing console. They have every kind of 2 different Steinway pianos. Yeah. Like 40 different keyboards of they have everything. Right. Anything you want. 50 amps. Like also all the choices that my musicians may want are all there. Right. So I spend a lot of time, specifically for On and On, really thinking about the drum sound, talking to Jairus Oakley, who's with me tonight, and saying, is there a way that we could bring the kind of J Dilla feel, but into jazz? And not in the way that Glasper did either, because he has his own sound, but in our own way, because we wanted to kind of reference this 70s tape, cool, warm soul
really
jazz thing.
Punchy and nice.
Exactly.
I mean, just like, it's almost that hi-fi 70s thing.
Exactly.
That's
it. Exactly. Yeah. So I had a lot of references to bring into the engineering way in advance. Right. And that means to all you watching, you spend a lot of time in pre-production, a lot of time, months and months of like, Is it the drum kit? This is the drum kit. How many snares do we need? These are the snares.
Right.
Really
getting into the weeds of like.
Yeah. And it's easy when you're there. You just, let's swap out that other snare.
Right.
Making notes, but like that stuff really makes a huge difference.
Right.
And I learned from Don Was, honestly, watching him. He'll say, I think we just get this snare, and you watch the guys run in, change one snare thing, move one, and then it's just like, totally different.
Huge difference, yeah.
So it's all that kind of stuff, picking the musicians,
right,
and giving them enough detail in advance. And like I had a session sheet. These are the songs. This is the order. This is what we're doing.
Yeah.
Everybody knew the keys and what was happening, but very open,
Right.
And that's it. And then you just roll tape and capture it.
Right.
And then I think the other part of it, again, this is very much for analog recording, is knowing when it's a take.
Right.
Being like, that's it, move on.
Yep.
Because other people want to change things. Like, no,
that was it. Yeah.
We're done. We got it.
Right.
And then I should mention on this one, because people are going to listen to this and say, this wasn't all recorded in one place in one day. I did do a lot of post-production with synths, with Big Yuki. Still analog synths.
Sure.
But I gave him, I think 2 weeks to go and listen to it.
Right.
I had notes that I wanted, and then I went over to his house, and then we tracked on top of what we had done, a lot of things. And I also did additional vocals too.
Sure.
So it's a blend of that 1950s jazz to tape, the 1970s hi-fi, and the modern multi-tracking post. You can do whatever you want with it.
Right.
Then we mixed it all to tape as well in LA.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I really doubled down on the aesthetic quality, because tape gives it a
right.
It just brings everything together in this
special
way,
Yeah, man, I wish I could talk with you for a whole lot longer, because I have a million questions.
Mixing
about
with the
that.
masters.
But yes, no, I love all that stuff. That's my background, is actually audio recording and stuff. I've done that for 20 years, so I love to nerd out about that stuff. So, but I've already kept you a little bit too long. I want to talk to you just briefly about, or I just want to mention briefly stuff you have coming up before I let you go to your sound check and things, because you've got a show to play.
Got a show. The show must go on.
The show must go on. You are going to Europe and then coming back to the States and everything. And where can people just find your tour dates, and what's the best spot for people to check out what's going on with José James?
Everything on josejamesmusic.com.
Okay.
I'm on Bandcamp. I'm on Bands in Town, rather.
Yep.
Also Bandcamp.
Yeah.
But it's great that shows are back.
Yeah.
I'm still excited about that. I'm still
we are too.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it was rough there for a while, for sure. You know, for venues and for artists, and so we love seeing the explosion of new artists coming in, and obviously, such a pleasure to meet a new person like yourself, and your first time here, and I'm so excited for the show tonight. So
thank you so much.
Thanks so much for sitting down with us.
Yeah. Thanks for watching, y'all.
All right. See you guys next time. Thanks for joining us for KPC Underground. If you're enjoying this podcast, please consider supporting KPC at kpcenter.org/donate. Your generosity helps us keep this and other programs going at Kirkland Performance Center. Be sure to check out our website for the latest events coming up. And hey, we'd also love to hear from you. Please rate our podcast, subscribe, comment, do all that stuff. And if you have a specific question or an idea for a show, email us at podcast@kpcenter.org. Thanks for listening.